Life had always been a blur for me. At 29, I was the embodiment of the work hard mantra, constantly chasing deadlines, climbing the corporate ladder. I rarely took time for myself, choosing to drown in reports, meetings and emails rather than acknowledging the void creeping into my life. My friends often joked that I was married to my job, but I knew it was true. I had forgotten what it meant to live, to feel. That's why, when the stress finally caught up to me, I made a rare decision to take a break and head to Aspen. The mountains promised solitude, a place where I could reset and, perhaps, remember what it felt like to breathe again. I didn't expect to meet anyone. I certainly didn't expect to meet her. It was the first evening after I arrived. I spotted her by the grand stone fireplace in the lodge, her silhouette framed by the flickering flames. Alina. She was unlike anyone I had ever seen. Her beauty was almost surreal, like she had stepped out of a dream. Her long jet black hair cascaded down her back, a stark contrast to her ivory skin. But it wasn't just her beauty that caught me. It was her air of mystery. Something about her that drew you in without a word. She seemed untouchable, yet magnetic. I tried to be casual when I approached her. "Mark," I introduced myself, attempting not to sound too eager. She looked up at me, her dark eyes studying me as if she already knew I was coming. "Elena," she said simply. Her voice soft but commanding. For the first few days, she kept her distance, always leaving me wanting more. She was like a puzzle I couldn't quite solve, and that only made her more alluring. We'd see each other around the lodge. She'd be reading by the window, or I'd catch her staring out at the snowy peaks, lost in thought. When we did talk, it was brief, guarded, but every conversation left me captivated, eager to learn more. One evening, after a long day on the slopes, we were just sitting in a group. We all were having random talks when she noticed me looking at her again, and a few minutes later, she invited me for a walk. I was a bit nervous. The cold mountain air was biting, but I didn't care. I just wanted to be near her. As we walked through the snow, she finally opened up. "I write," she said casually, as if it wasn't a big deal. "Write? Like novels?" She nodded. "Mostly fiction. I'm obsessed with stories. They help me make sense of things that don't always make sense." It was the first glimpse into her mind, and I was hooked. Elena was a writer, but not just any writer. She told me she came from a wealthy family, that she could have lived a life of comfort and luxury. But that wasn't her. She was driven by an insatiable desire to experience the world, to understand it, to capture its beauty and chaos in her words. She had traveled everywhere, from the streets of Paris to the deserts of Morocco, always searching for inspiration. For something to write about. "Why Aspen then?" I asked, curious. She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Sometimes you don't know why you're drawn to a place, you just feel it." Her words often had a strange, almost abstract quality to them, like she was speaking in riddles. I found it both intriguing and frustrating. But that was Elena, a mystery I couldn't unravel, and I wasn't sure if I ever wanted to. As we spent more time together, Elena's walls slowly began to come down. She was still elusive, but there were moments when she'd let her guard down, and I could see the woman behind the mystery. She'd make me laugh with her sharp wit, and challenge my views with her unique perspective on life. She had this almost philosophical way of seeing the world, and though some of it didn't make sense to me, it was hard not to be enchanted by her. Elena was unlike any woman I had ever seen, an exotic beauty who seemed to belong to another world. Her long jet black hair fell effortlessly past her shoulders, framing a face that was both delicate and striking. Her almond-shaped eyes were a deep shade of brown, almost black, always sparkling with a mystery that made me want to uncover her secrets. She dressed with an effortless elegance that made her stand out in the rugged cold mountains, luxurious cashmere sweaters that clung to her slim frame, paired with sleek leather boots and scarves wrapped loosely around her neck. But beneath her chic exterior, there was an edge, glimpses of hidden tattoos peeking out from her neckline and wrists, their intricate designs barely visible under the layers of winter clothing. Each time she moved, I caught flashes of ink, like hints to a story only she knew. Her voice was as alluring as her appearance, carrying a soft foreign accent that was impossible to place. Somewhere between European sophistication and something more exotic, like she'd lived in many places but belonged to none. She spoke slowly, deliberately, choosing her words like they were part of a larger puzzle, leaving me hanging onto each syllable. As the days passed, I became obsessed, not just with her beauty, but with her. There was something about her calm confidence, the way she moved through the world as though nothing could touch her. She was elusive, always keeping just enough distance to make me want more. Every time we talked, I found myself falling deeper, trying to decode her cryptic thoughts, trying to understand the meaning behind her gaze. Her allure wasn't just in her looks, but in her mystery, and I couldn't stop thinking about her even when she wasn't around. It was as if she had cast a spell on me. And the more I tried to unravel her, the tighter the spell became. It was midday, and while most people were out skiing, Elena was sitting under a large pine tree, wrapped in a thick wool coat, a book resting on her lap. The sun broke through the cold air, casting soft light over her as she sat there, lost in the pages of a novel. I had been watching her from a distance for a while, mesmerized by the way she seemed so at peace, so absorbed in her own world while everything around her was in constant motion. Curiosity pulled me toward her, and as I approached, she didn't even look up, her dark eyes still tracing the words on the page. "Not skiing today?" I asked, sitting down beside her. She smiled faintly, her eyes finally lifting from the book. "I prefer stories to slopes," she said, her voice soft and melodic. She gestured to the book in her hands, a well-worn copy of some novel I didn't recognize. "Fictional worlds are where I truly escape." I asked her what she was reading, and that was all it took. She launched into an impassioned explanation of the book's plot, the characters, and the layers of meaning hidden within the story. She told me how she had always been obsessed with dark, twisted novels, stories where the lines between good and evil blurred, where characters were flawed and broken, yet profoundly human. "There's something about getting lost in someone else's mind," she said, her eyes lighting up. "The way a writer can create entire worlds out of nothing, how they can manipulate your emotions, make you care for someone who's morally ambiguous. It's intoxicating." I sat there, listening, captivated by her passion. She spoke about fictional characters as if they were real people, explaining how some had stayed with her long after the final page was turned. "I fall in love with them," she admitted, almost bashfully. "The villains, the misunderstood anti-heroes, the ones who are dark but so beautifully complex. They become a part of me." She went on and on, her words flowing effortlessly, revealing her obsession with stories that didn't offer simple answers. She spoke of the tragic love affairs in her favorite novels, of characters who sacrificed everything for fleeting moments of passion. As she spoke, her voice grew more animated, and I found myself hanging on to every word. There was a fire in her, a deep consuming passion for the written word that drew me in. "Books," she said finally, her eyes meeting mine. "They give me an escape. Reality is too predictable. Fiction lets me feel alive." And as she talked, I realized I wasn't just listening to her words. I was watching her become the very embodiment of those mysterious, dark characters she so adored. In that moment, I knew I was completely captivated by her. Just as much as she was by the novels she cherished. The next day we shared an experience that I would never forget. Elena and I decided to explore the woods. Well, she invited me and I said yes. She was told by some locals about this dense foggy forest that looks exactly like what we see in fantasy movies. Really tall and majestic trees and beautiful lakes. She was a bit nervous to go alone and asked me if I could accompany her. I obviously said yes. So the next day, as planned, we went to this forest by asking around the locals. I didn't know when I'd be back, so I told my friend before leaving. Upon arriving, I realized this forest did actually look like a place out of fantasy books. The air was crisp and cold, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. Towering evergreens stretched toward the sky, their branches heavy with frost, creating a canopy that filters the pale sunlight into soft silver beams. A gentle fog rolls through, adding an air of mystery, while the sound of a distant stream echoes softly, blending with the occasional rustle of unseen wildlife. Elena lit up as soon as we saw this place. She loved this place and wanted to go deep into the forest. She wanted to see this lake that's supposed to be in there somewhere. I told her that it's getting late, we should be thinking about heading back, but she started insisting like a child, "Please, I have no idea when I'd come back here," she said. I agreed to go further. After we had been walking for what felt like hours, and the light was quickly fading. The once welcoming forest now seemed dense and unfamiliar, the towering trees casting long eerie shadows on the snowy ground. My breath was coming out in small, visible puffs, and the cold was biting, but Elena was getting scared. "We've been walking in circles, haven't we?" she said, her voice small and unsure, her breath shaky in the cold air. Her eyes scanned the darkening woods nervously, and I could see her starting to unravel. I looked around, trying to seem calm, though I wasn't sure where we were anymore. I kept my voice steady. "No, we'll figure it out. Let's just keep moving. If we stay in one spot, it'll only get colder. Don't worry, I won't let anything happen to you." She nodded but remained quiet. I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her arms hugged her body tighter as the temperature continued to drop. I wanted to comfort her more, but I wasn't exactly brimming with confidence myself. How did we even get this far out? It hit me then, we'd gotten lost because we were so deep in conversation. I had been hanging on to every word she said, and before I knew it we had wandered too far. Elena was fascinating. Like a puzzle I wanted to keep solving. And time had slipped away from us. We'd been talking about travel at first. How much she loved exploring new places, how it made her feel alive. But then, as we wandered further into the woods, she opened up more than I ever expected. "I guess I'm always searching for something," she said softly, as we continued to walk, our footsteps crunching in the snow. Her voice had shifted from her usual confidence to something more fragile, like a small crack in the carefully composed exterior she usually presented. "When I was 9, my mom died. It changed everything." I stayed quiet, listening, realizing that this was something important. Something personal. "My dad remarried a year later," she continued, her voice almost lost in the sound of the wind through the trees. "I never got along with my stepmother. She and her daughter had their own little world, and I was the outsider. I hated being home, so I left every chance I got. At first, it was just escaping to the park or staying at friends' houses. But as I got older, it became more than that. I wanted to go as far away as possible. Traveling was my way of never being stuck." Her words hung in the air between us, heavy but revealing. I could feel the pain she carried, and yet, there was this strange beauty in her openness. For someone who seemed so composed, so hard to read, Elena was full of contradictions, and it made me want to know her even more. We kept walking, but as the night fell and the cold crept in, I could see the fear in her eyes grow. The woods were darker now, and the temperature was dropping fast. Elena stumbled slightly on a root, and I reached out to steady her. "We're going to be okay," I said, pulling her close for warmth. She nodded, but I could feel her body trembling. Not just from the cold but from the uncertainty of our situation. For a while, we walked in silence. Then as we stumbled through the dense trees, Elena began to speak again. But this time in that abstract, almost cryptic way she often did. "You ever think," she started, her voice distant, "that maybe the world we see isn't the real one? Like, there are things happening beneath the surface, things we can't explain, but they're there. We're just not tuned in to see them." I frowned slightly, trying to make sense of what she was saying. "What do you mean?" She shook her head, her breath catching in the cold. "It's like, I don't know. We're all walking in circles, searching for something that might not even exist. Or maybe it does, but by the time we find it, we don't even recognize it anymore. You ever feel that?" I didn't really understand. I mean, I got the words, but the meaning behind them felt just out of reach. Yet there was something about the way she spoke, the intensity in her voice, that made me listen. Elena had this way of drawing you in, even when you couldn't fully grasp what she meant. "Maybe," I said, not sure if it was the right answer but knowing she needed to hear something. Just when I thought we might be stuck wandering the woods all night, I heard voices in the distance, faint but unmistakable. Relief washed over me as I grabbed Elena's arm, pulling her in the direction of the sound. "Hey, over here!" I shouted, my voice echoing through the trees. A moment later, 2 of the campers emerged from the darkness, their flashlights cutting through the shadows. "We've been looking for you guys," one of them called. "Are you okay?" "We're fine," I said, glancing at Elena, who looked exhausted but relieved. "Just lost our way." They led us back toward their camp, and as we walked, I couldn't help but glance at Elena every now and then. Her expression was hard to read, but I could see something had shifted. She had opened up to me in a way she hadn't before, and despite the cold and the fear, I felt closer to her than ever. It wasn't just her beauty or her mystery anymore, it was the vulnerability she showed in that dark, quiet moment in the woods. The part of her that was lost, just like we were, but still searching. And I knew then that I wanted to be part of that search, even if I never fully understood where it would lead. That night, as we trudged back to the hotel from the woods, exhaustion hung over me like a heavy blanket. My legs ached, and my face was still cold from the long walk. Elena was beside me, quiet but her presence warm in the cold mountain air. As we neared the hotel, she stopped and turned to me. Before I could process what was happening, she wrapped her arms around me in a soft, unexpected hug. The warmth of her body was a stark contrast to the chill outside, and I froze for a moment, surprised. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice gentle and sincere. "For today, for coming with me." I was caught off guard, feeling a mix of emotions I couldn't fully understand, but I smiled and hugged her back. "I'm glad we went. I'll see you at the bonfire later." She nodded, pulling away slowly and giving me a lingering look before turning toward her room. "See you at the bonfire," she said over her shoulder, and then she was gone. I made my way up to my room, still trying to process the entire day, getting lost in the woods, the vulnerable side of Elena I'd glimpsed, that hug. I felt like I was walking through a dream. My friend called out to me as I entered the lobby, reminding me about the bonfire. "It's supposed to be a great one tonight. Go freshen up and head down. You don't want to miss it." I nodded but barely heard him. By the time I reached my room, my body gave in to the fatigue. I kicked off my shoes, collapsed onto the bed, and within moments I was out cold. I woke up to a loud knock on my door. I blinked, disoriented, and fumbled for my phone. It was nearly midnight. I bolted upright, heart racing, realizing I had completely missed the bonfire. The knock came again, softer this time. I got up, opened the door, and there was Elena, standing in the dim hallway, holding 2 bottles of wine in her hands. "Why didn't you come down?" she asked, smiling softly, her eyes twinkling with amusement. I rubbed my eyes, still groggy. "I fell asleep. I didn't mean to. The day just..." She interrupted me with a quiet laugh. "You've had a long day. I get it, but I brought wine. Mind if I come in?" I stepped aside, nodding. "Yeah, of course." She walked in and I closed the door behind her. The fire in the fireplace was still going, casting a warm orange glow around the room. Elena moved toward it, setting the bottles down on the small table near the hearth, and then she sat down on the rug, gesturing for me to join her. I sat next to her, feeling the warmth of the fire seep into my skin. She opened one of the bottles, handed me a glass, and we clinked them together in an unspoken toast. For a while, we just sat there, sipping the wine, the flames dancing in the fireplace, casting flickering shadows on the walls. Elena's face was illuminated by the firelight, her dark hair falling loosely around her shoulders. There was something almost magical about the moment, something unspoken but understood. "I feel like we're the only people in the world right now," she said quietly, her eyes fixed on the fire. "Do you ever feel that way? Like the rest of the world just fades away and it's only you, and the person you're with?" Her words stirred something in me, a deep sense of connection I hadn't felt in a long time. I turned to look at her, and suddenly the air between us shifted. I wasn't sure who moved first, but before I knew it we were leaning into each other, our lips meeting in a slow tentative kiss that quickly deepened. Her hands were in my hair, pulling me closer, and I felt my pulse quicken as I wrapped my arms around her. The next moments blurred together, kisses turning into touches, the soft sound of her breath as I traced the curve of her spine. We moved to the bed, the fire still crackling in the background, its heat mingling with the growing warmth between us. Elena's touch was electric, her skin soft under my hands, and soon, nothing existed but her. We undressed slowly, savoring every moment, the anticipation building. When we finally came together, it was like nothing I had ever felt before, intimate, raw, and vulnerable. Every touch, every kiss felt like it had a deeper meaning. As if we were baring not just our bodies but our souls to each other. The world outside ceased to exist. There was only us, tangled together in the firelight, our hearts beating in sync. Afterward, we lay in the soft glow of the fire, our breathing slowly returning to normal. I traced my fingers absent-mindedly over her skin, and that's when I noticed them. Small, intricate tattoos scattered across her body, hidden beneath her clothes until now. They were delicate but clearly meaningful. I ran my fingers over one on her side, a pattern of stars and moons that wrapped around her ribcage. "What's this one?" I asked, my voice soft in the quiet room. She smiled, a little shy but open, and propped herself up on one elbow to look at me. "That one," she said, glancing down at the tattoo, "is for my mom. She used to tell me stories about the stars when I was a kid. She believed that when someone you love dies, they become part of the sky, watching over you. After she passed, I got this to remind me that she's always with me." I nodded, understanding the significance behind it. "It's beautiful," I said, brushing my thumb over the delicate ink. Elena shifted, revealing another tattoo, this one on her hip, a small intricate design of a bird in flight. "This one's for freedom," she explained, her voice quieter now. "I got it when I left home for the first time, when I decided to start living my life for myself. It reminds me that I'm not trapped, that I can always find a way to fly." She turned slightly, revealing yet another tattoo on her lower back, a symbol I didn't recognize. I traced the lines with my fingers, curious. "And this one?" She smiled, a little more cryptic this time. "That's just for me," she said, her eyes meeting mine. A reminder that some things don't need to be explained. Some things just are. I didn't press her further, understanding that there were parts of Elena that would always remain a mystery, beautiful, enigmatic, and deeply personal. We lay there in silence after that, the fire slowly dying down, and for the first time in a long time, I felt completely at peace. Elena curled into me, her head resting on my chest, and as I held her close, I couldn't shake the feeling that this moment, this night, was something I would carry with me forever. No matter what happened after, this was ours, and no one could take it away. I woke up to the faint light of dawn creeping through the curtains, the warmth of the fire long gone, leaving only the cold mountain air to seep into the room. I blinked, groggy, and turned over, reaching for Elena, but the bed beside me was empty. At first I didn't think much of it, maybe she was in the bathroom or had stepped out for a moment. I waited a few minutes, listening for any sound, any sign of her presence, but there was nothing. After a while, curiosity got the best of me. I called out her name softly. "Elena?" No response. I pushed the covers off, pulled on my clothes, and wandered over to the bathroom. Empty. I checked her room next, knocking first, then opening the door slowly. But it was the same. No sign of her. An unsettling feeling crept in as I made my way downstairs. The lobby was quiet, the dining area sparse with a few early risers, but she wasn't there either. I asked around, at the front desk, a few of the other guests, but no one seemed to know anything about her. She had come alone, kept to herself. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. Confused, I returned to my room, my thoughts racing. My mind tried to make sense of it. Maybe she had left early for another trip. Maybe something urgent had come up. But why wouldn't she have said anything? Why disappear like that, without a word? I sank into the chair by the fireplace, staring at the empty room. It felt hollow without her, like a part of me was missing. That's when I noticed something small, glinting in the soft morning light on the bedside table. Her bracelet. A simple, silver band with a tiny star charm, the same one she had worn every day since I met her. I picked it up, holding it in my hand, feeling the cool metal against my palm. It was the only trace of her left behind. As I sat there, holding the bracelet, there was a knock at the door. My friend stood there, reminding me that it was time to leave, time to head back to reality. I nodded, numbly, still trying to process everything. Elena was gone, just like that. Without a trace, without any way to find her. And I cursed myself for not asking for her contact information, for not thinking ahead, for assuming that our time together wouldn't end so abruptly. The ride back home was quiet. I stared out of the window, watching the mountains slowly fade into the distance, but my mind was somewhere else, still with her. I replayed every moment we had spent together. Every word, every laugh, every kiss. I couldn't shake the feeling of loss, like I had let something precious slip through my fingers. Days turned into weeks, and the restlessness only grew. I became obsessed with finding her. I searched everywhere. On social media, travel blogs, forums, any place where she might have left a trace. I tried calling the hotel, asking if they had any record of her stay, but all they had was a first name, Elena. It was like chasing a ghost. I even searched through old phone diaries, asked friends if they knew anyone who might have crossed paths with her, but every lead came up empty. The nights were the worst. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering where she was, what she was doing. Had she moved on, forgotten about me? About everything we shared? Or was she out there somewhere, thinking about me too? Sometimes I would dream about her, about the way her eyes lit up when she talked about her novels, about the way her hair caught the firelight that night. And when I woke up, it was like losing her all over again. Months passed, but she was always there, lingering in the back of my mind. I would be working, or walking down the street, and suddenly I'd think of her, wondering if she was in some far-off place, writing her next novel, or sitting by a different fire, with someone else. I hated myself for not asking for more. For not pushing to know more about her life beyond the mountains. But I had never imagined she would disappear like a fleeting dream. And yet, despite the restlessness, despite the questions that had no answers, there was something in those memories that I held onto. Our time together, though brief, had been real. The connection we shared wasn't something that could just vanish. It was woven into the fabric of who I was now. Elena had left a mark on me. One that went beyond the physical, beyond the fleeting romance. She had opened something inside me, a part of myself I hadn't even known existed. One evening, as I sat by the window in my apartment, watching the sunset paint the sky with the same golden hues that once bathed the mountains, I realized something. Elena had come into my life when I needed it most. She was like a spark, igniting a part of me that had been buried under work and responsibilities for too long. Her sudden disappearance had left a void, but it also gave me a gift, a reminder of what it felt like to be alive, to feel deeply, to be open to the unknown. I couldn't find her. Maybe I never would. But I knew now that it wasn't about the search anymore. It was about the way she had changed me. The way she had shown me that life wasn't meant to be planned and structured. It was meant to be lived, moment by moment, in the fleeting, magical spaces between the ordinary. And so I stopped searching. Not because I had given up, but because I realized that I didn't need to find her to hold on to what we had. She was with me, in the stars and the moon, in the memories we made, in the stories I would one day tell. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough.